Once you have a technical solution to meet your needs, you're still not finished, because now your government comes involved. Your equipment cannot disturb the equipment next door. So depending on where your equipment is being used, you're facing different regulations. And that also need to be considered. Then the simple problem tends to become a little bit more complex than you originally anticipated. Hello, I'm Florian Heike, CEO of Celinius Company Limited, having lived in Taiwan for almost 25 years. And we are supporting the power electronic needs, whether it's in components or application requirements, for mostly special lighting customers, whether they are in Asia, Europe, and also North America. We fix those little problems that most people don't see that are surrounding lighting applications, whether it's industrial applications, equipment, measurement, or also like here in the studio where we take a recording.
Okay, Florian, so here's a question. Is there a common definition of special lighting versus regular lighting? Maybe you can share what are the differences? When does it become a special lighting project?
Okay, I am not aware of a, let's say, encyclopedia type of definition of special lighting. However, you could summarize it basically as following. You have the average Joe or the average Jane, and they live at home. And when they park their car at a parking lot, so the lighting that you usually encounter when you enter your home, whether it's the lighting in your basement, in your cabinet, or at home, that's all general lighting. Also, the street lamp in front of your house is general lighting. However, so everything that's not general lighting can be considered special lighting.
Okay, that's still a pretty broad definition. Maybe you can just give us like 2 or 3 quick examples of special lightings.
Okay, so I think I give you a very simple explanation how you can detect this. So like when you are in a location like a studio or a special place you're not usually at, then the lighting will influence how you appear or how you use it. For instance, if you take your camera of your smartphone and you take a movie and then direct the cell phone to the light, then you will often see some lines or some flickering in your movie. Well, then this is a case where this lighting is not suitable for taking a camera picture. And when we look at industrial equipment, where we use the lighting to either have a process, whether it's gluing, drying, or just taking an inspection and a quality process, this behavior that I just explained on a cell phone would not be acceptable. And in the moment you have this kind of situation, then your general light typically would not work.
Right. So can you share how you help clients with special lighting problems?
Yeah. Okay. So the good news is, when you encounter like the problem that I explained to you just before, you are probably not the first one encountering this type of problem, but there have already been quite some other folks having similar problems in other applications or needs. So then when somebody comes to me and says, look, I have this issue, I would like to solve it, what would be your recommendation? And especially when it comes to lighting, a light itself doesn't work alone. It needs a power source. So a lot of these parameters, I mean, of course, the optical parameters tend to be related to the light source itself, to nowadays mostly the LED itself. But the dynamic behavior of the light source is typically influenced by the power electronics driving that light source. And that's exactly where our core skill is. So for instance, coming back to the smartphone camera stable light source issue, you have multiple ways to solve it. So one way is to say, okay, I want a very flat, constant light source. Yeah, for low light, that's not so difficult to do. But when you have a powerful light source, it's a very different situation. The reason is because our power plugs that we have, that usually provide the power source to our applications, they're not DC sources, they're not direct current sources, they are alternate current sources. So there's always a ripple in the power source. And depending on the level of stability you need, it's not economically necessary to just use a standard capacitor. You would use a different control circuit. And then immediately this power supply is no longer a standard power source. If you have process needs, whether for instance a UV drying process or some kind of exposure, the light sources often are not LED, because the LED is usually not so efficient in the spectrum outside of the visible spectrum. So for drying, you can use a UV drying or IR drying. And those light sources often, especially UV lamps, they don't accept DC current. They accept also, they need to have an alternate current. Yeah, now when it comes to the frequency of your camera and the frequency of the light source, they have to work together. So one way would be to synchronize the driving current of the lamp with the repeat cycle of your camera. Or you use a very, very high frequency to drive it, but then you don't want to have an overlapping ripple. So, but these are all approaches that depends on the light source, that depend on your power source, that depend on your camera, on the use. For instance, if you are using a high-speed camera, you have a very different repeat cycle than your normal smartphone camera. And yeah, those you need to know. So it depends. It's a combination of the application needs, the equipment that's used inside, the light source itself, and the power source driving it. So, and then once you have a technical solution to meet your needs, you're still not finished, because now your government comes involved and says like, hey, your equipment cannot disturb the equipment next door. So there are like regulatory requirements for electromagnetic compatibility. Or the government says, look, your equipment cannot be disturbed by an external pulse that may come through your power line. It's called ESD, electronic surge protection that you need to have in your power supply. And then it also depends on where your product is being used. Requirements like in the maritime world, on ships are different than on land. If you're on a plane, it's different again. Your system cannot interfere with the navigation equipment. So depending on where your equipment is being used, you are facing different regulations. And that also need to be considered. So and then the simple problem tends to become a little bit more complex than you originally anticipated. And that's exactly where engineers, components, manufacturing processes, materials all come involved. And this defines special lighting.
Okay, that's a very concise explanation, and it sounds like the people they don't realize the clients, the customers, they don't realize the amount of variables that come into play. They just want to install a light for, let's say, the airplane, the ship, or the studio. Do you think there's a big disconnect in what these entrepreneurs are trying to do and all the problems that they need to solve?
Well, on the other side, I would frame it differently. If we wouldn't have innovative entrepreneurs, we would still work the same way as we did 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you also need those people with the experience that know about all those mistakes that have been done in the past, or a lot of these mistakes that have been done in the past, not to repeat it. So it's not a black or white situation. In the lighting field, we do have the great benefit of the LED technology, which is basically revolutionizing the whole industry. So a lot of applications that used to be done by conventional lighting now use LED or a special type of LED. But using LED is not solving all the problems, it's also offering some new challenges. When it comes to color consistency, to long lifetime, especially for UV LEDs, they don't have that much of a lifetime. So again, there are new challenges being posed, and then there are strategies on how to deal with these challenges. Mm-hmm. And often in many industrial and commercial applications, the operational cost of a light source is one key element. So we often say, when it comes to lighting, let's say you're a shop owner and you want to display your products in your window then you light them up with the goal to attract customers, to initiate an impulsive desire to procure this product. So you want to make sure that this product looks good. And you're willing to buy a lamp for this, and you're willing to spend electricity to light this up, mm-hmm. and you're renting the space, which is tend to be not so cheap, right? When you're on a high street and you have this shop window there. So you invest a combination of money, whether it is the product itself, electricity, the space, and you want to have a reliable lamp that doesn't flicker, that doesn't go off, that is not creating adverse effect. And now you are not sure what you really want. So the most of the challenge that we face is that the customers underestimate the challenges over the long term.
Mm.
Yeah?
Yeah. Because it sounds like those challenges come later, the problems come later after
Yes.
they've already
Correct.
set up the shop.
Yeah. Actually, you can see this, when you go to, or say, not so high-end fast food restaurants, and they often use these plastic light strips, maybe around the tables or those things. Mm-hmm. They tend to look quite good in the beginning, but after a couple of months, you see some bluish, reddish points instead of whitish points. Yeah, that's a typical example of where a good idea turned to become quite crappy over time. And the reason for this is that the color stability of the LED in that application was neglected. And that's to do with the chemicals in the light. And then some of these plastic strips, they were transparent in the beginning, and they become yellowish over time because of the UV exposure in the material. It doesn't look so good after a couple of months. So now, depending on the attitude of the owner, either he lets the customer sit with the crappy light, or every couple of months he's changing the light, which is also cost. He needs to hire somebody to remove the poor lamp, put a new one in. Maybe it would have been better to choose a little bit more expensive, better light over the long term.
Yeah.
But he usually weren't aware of it until they learn, until they make the poor experience. A very common